When 18-year-old Elizabeth Ann Bissiglia met 21-year-old Daniel T. Broderick III while attending a football game between the University of Southern California and the University of Notre Dame, she was young, in love, and full of hopes and dreams. When Betty and Dan married 4 years later, the young couple was ready to tackle the world, and they did. But nobody who knew the couple could have predicted their 30-year marriage would end with one of them being murdered and the other one on trial. Betty, as she was known to family and friends, was born Elizabeth Ann Bissiglia on November 7, 1947. Her parents, Frank, an Italian-American, and Marita, an Irish-American, were both devout Roman Catholics. The Bisiglias lived in Bronxville, New York, where they owned a successful plastering business with relatives. Betty graduated from Maria Regina High School. She went on to attend the College of Mount St. Vincent. She graduated with a degree in early childhood education with a minor in English. Daniel T. Broderick III was born on November 22, 1944, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was the oldest son of a very large Irish Catholic family. Dan and Betty were married on April 12, 1969, at the Immaculate Conception Church in Tuckahoe, New York. When the couple returned from their honeymoon, they learned Betty was pregnant with their first child. Betty gave birth to their first daughter, who they named Kim, in 1970. Betty would go on to have 4 more children with Dan: a daughter named Lee in 1971, sons Daniel Jr. in 1976, and Rhett in 1979. They had an unnamed son who died 4 days after birth. Betty's pregnancies were difficult. She was frequently nauseated, tired, and she even had bleeding. When Dan and Betty married, Dan was in school to become a doctor. After the birth of their first child, he completed his MD. Instead of going into practice, Dan decided he wanted to combine his medical expertise with a law degree. Dan applied to and was accepted into Harvard's law program. Money was tight for the young couple, with Dan in school, Betty being pregnant, and having a young child. While they had student loans to pay for Dan's education, it was Betty who was the family's breadwinner during this time. She held down a multitude of jobs. She even sold Tupperware door to door in the middle of winter with her 2 small children holding her hand. Times were tough for the young family. They were virtually destitute at times, surviving on food stamps. They moved in and out of dormitories. Things were about to change. In 1973, the Broderick family moved again, this time to the other side of the country so that Dan could complete a summer clerkship in Los Angeles, California. After receiving some advice from an attorney friend, Dan sought out a legal position in San Diego. Betty would later describe the reason for the move was so Dan could be, quote, a bigger fish in a smaller pond. Dan had a dual degree in both medicine and law, and as such was a catch to most legal firms. He accepted a position as a junior partner at the law firm Carey Gray in San Diego. Excited that they had finally climbed the social and financial ladder, Dan and Betty put a down payment on a home in the posh neighborhood of Coral Reef, as depicted in this scene from the drama series Dirty John, the Betty Broderick story, the series based on the case. The couple had climbed a few rungs on the ladder of success, but money didn't pour in right away. So Betty did what she had always done. She worked, this time teaching religious classes at the local school. In 1979, Betty earned her real estate license. Her friend Bella Stumbo recalled, quote, "It was 5 years before Dan finally began to earn enough money that she could stay home. From the day they were married until the year Dan Broderick's income first hit $1 million, his wife was never too proud or too lazy to work twice as hard as most women could or would. Somewhere between the struggle and the success, cracks in the marriage began to show. Dan, whom some would describe as not only obsessed with his work, but with ingratiating himself into the social life he believed was mandatory to becoming one of San Diego's top attorneys. Dan was the first to arrive at work at 5 a.m. He spent many evenings with his associates after the office closed. He could usually be found in an Irish bar trading stories with his partners or singing Irish songs with his fraternity brothers, the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. Betty spent her time cooking and keeping a home. It was during this period Dan and Betty's two sons, Danny Jr. in 1976 and Red in 1979, were born. For her part, Betty seemed to be supportive of her husband's absence from the home. She had her hands full. While Dan's wardrobe was named Bran, earning him the nickname Dapper Dan, Betty's and the children's clothes were discount store and secondhand finds. In fact, Betty could be found carting their clothes to a local laundromat, as the couple didn't even own a washing machine or dryer until well into their marriage. When Dan decided to leave Cary Gray in 1978 to start his own law practice, Betty supported him. She helped decorate his new offices. They spent their evenings choosing the perfect conservative decor for his new quarters. Perhaps it was because Dan was away from what Betty referred to as his, quote, drinking buddies. But Betty, for a time, says that Dan had become the kind of husband she had hoped for. He still worked long hours at the office, but he would come home immediately after. The family spent the evenings together, often talking about the day's events. Dan even hired a maid so that Betty could devote more time to community clubs, which she enjoyed. Due to his medical background and knowledge of the law, Dan soon became known as the lawyer to seek for medical malpractice cases. His new practice skyrocketed. The Broderick family finally had the financial and professional success they had worked so hard and sacrificed so much to achieve. However, money was still a source of conflict between the couple. Only now it wasn't the lack of money causing the fights, but how to spend it. Dan criticized Betty for spending money on furniture and clothing. Money, Betty claimed, she'd earned as a real estate agent. Betty criticized Dan for spending money on an investment in property, often without consulting her, and on a lavish wardrobe Dan said he needed as a man in his profession. Betty was beginning to resent being second to Dan's career and felt his interest in her was waning. On a family vacation, Dan and Betty got into a fight because Dan spent more time at the hotel bar than with her and the children. There were other changes in Dan too. He turned in his glasses for contact lenses, had his hair layered, and even had his nose reshaped. For her part, Betty dealt with the distance in the marriage by focusing on the children and her home. She spent her time driving the children to and from their various activities in her Chevrolet Suburban with vanity plates that read, "Load 'em up." Betty hosted many events in the couple's Coral Reef home. She threw herself into decorating their dining room in the spirit of whatever the event was. Balloons for birthday parties, garlands and wreaths at Christmas. As their bank account grew, so did the divide in their marriage. By 1983, a new distraction would create a divide so big the marriage would be over. Linda Colquino was born to a hard-working middle-class family in Salt Lake City, Utah. She had worked briefly for Delta Airlines. Later, she earned money as a temporary receptionist for a number of clients, including a law firm. Linda was 21 years old the first time she met Dan Broderick. It was at a party given by lawyer friends in early 1993. Betty, standing near him, heard Dan tell a friend, quote, "Isn't she beautiful?" The remark took Betty by surprise, as Dan wasn't one easily given to such attractions. But Betty put it out of her mind as just a fancy at a party who would never cross Dan's path again. Not long after, Dan hired her as his personal assistant, despite the fact that Linda had no paralegal, no medical malpractice experience, and she couldn't even type. Betty was immediately suspicious. However, she decided to wait until she had more solid evidence before confronting Dan. When she told her friends about her suspicions, they reassured her that Dan was not the type to cheat. Subsequent incidents caused Betty's antenna to go up. First, during a family vacation to New York during the summer of 1983, Betty caught Dan hidden away in an alcove of the hotel lobby, calling Linda. Later, when the Brodericks were touring Europe, Betty discovered Dan had telegraphed flowers to Linda. Betty began questioning Dan about Linda. Dan, irritated with her from his perspective, constant badgering, continued to insist it was all in her imagination. By the fall, Betty threw her pride aside and called one of the paralegals at Dan's office to ask her what she knew about Dan and Linda's relationship. Preferring to remain uninvolved, she told Betty she didn't know anything. However, the paralegal told her boss, Dan, to be upfront with his wife. Dan fired her. Betty, convinced her fears were due to her insecurity, sought help from a therapist. The session stopped, however, after an incident on Dan's 39th birthday. Betty, intending to surprise Dan on his birthday, arrived at his office with a bottle of champagne and a dozen roses. An office secretary told Betty Dan was out and she wasn't sure where. Dan's office was empty except for some balloons, cake crumbs, and empty wine bottles. Linda's office was empty too. Neither Dan nor his assistant returned to the office that afternoon. What was meant to be a birthday surprise for Dan turned out to be a surprise for Betty. However, Betty had one last birthday surprise for Dan Broderick. After arriving home and still seething with rage, Betty headed straight for Dan's closet. She pulled out all of Dan's tailor-made clothes, headed to the backyard, poured gasoline on them, and lit a match. Her children watched as their father's clothing was ablaze. As they watched, they cried. There was no argument that night between Dan and Betty. Dan merely denied having an affair and blamed Betty's overactive imagination. Betty didn't believe him. Finally, on the last day of February 1984, Dan admitted to the affair. He announced he was seeking a separation, moving out of the rental home in La Jolla and moving back into the Coral Reef house. The Coral Reef home had been under repair after a large crack in the foundation was discovered. A perfect metaphor of Dan and Betty's marriage. The separation and subsequent divorce was contentious, to say the least. Betty claims that Dan controlled her with money. She began dropping the children off one at a time on Dan's doorstep. After showing up unannounced, Betty spotted a Boston cream pie. After the housekeeper informed her that Linda had dropped it off, Betty, pie in hand, headed upstairs to her former bedroom and smeared pie all over the bed and Dan's closet full of clothes. Dan obtained a restraining order. And that's how it went for years. Betty lashed out. Dan reacted using his knowledge of the law. In January 1989, the Broderick marriage was officially dissolved. Things escalated again when Dan sold the Coral Reef home. Using a legal maneuver, he was able to sell the home without Betty's consent, having an appointed proxy sign the transaction. Betty was livid. To her, the sale of the home represented the loss of the life she had worked so hard to achieve, the life Linda seemed to step into effortlessly. Betty drove her Suburban through the front door of Dan's new home. The police were called. Betty was sent to a mental health hospital for 3 days. After the Suburban incident, Betty found a new weapon, Dan and Linda's answering machine. Betty would leave up to 3 and 4 obscene, ranting messages on the answering machine. Often, the couple's 4 children heard these messages. Dan, understandably, petitioned the court seeking full custody of their 4 children. Dan was awarded full custody. 3 months later, Dan and Linda announced their engagement. On April 22, 1989, Dan and Linda were married. In the early morning hours of November 5th, 1989, Betty Broderick woke up, silently crept out of her house where her 2 sons were still sleeping, and got into her car. In her purse was a loaded .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol and her daughter's keychain. Betty drove from La Jolla, headed towards San Diego. She arrived at the home of her ex-husband Dan and his new wife Linda. First, she tried to unlock the front door, but the key didn't work. Betty went to the back door. This time, the key worked. Betty walked into the house and up the stairs to the master bedroom. In bed, asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger, were Dan and Linda. Betty pulled the gun out of her purse and aimed it at Linda. She pulled the trigger. Linda's body shook. Betty pulled the trigger again. This time, the shot was fatal. Next, she went over to Dan. He opened his eyes and saw Betty standing over him with a smoking gun. He muttered something and tried to roll off of the bed. Betty shot him in the back. Betty Broderick fired the gun a total of 5 times. Linda was shot once in the neck and once in the chest. Dan was shot in the back. Before leaving, Betty ripped the phone and the cord from the wall. Through an attorney, Betty Broderick turned herself into police. She was charged with murder and held in jail until her trial. Betty's first trial began on October 22, 1990. The prosecution's case was simple. In prosecutor Kelly Wells' opening statement, she said, quote, "This case is not only about murder. It is about premeditated murder," end quote. She played Dan and Linda's answering machine tapes. Dan and Betty's daughters testified for the state. The girls testified to their mother's threats to kill Dan. Defense attorney Jack Early's opening statement made it clear that he would argue that Betty was not the aggressor, but a woman pushed to a nervous breakdown by Dan's, quote, "snowstorm of paper, a litigious assault that started somewhere around 1985, end quote. Betty Broderick took the stand in her own defense. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury announced they were hopelessly deadlocked. 2 jurors refused to believe she was guilty of premeditated murder. Betty's next trial was in October of 1991. It was basically the first trial all over again. Betty again took the stand in her own defense. This time, the jury found her guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder. Betty Broderick was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 years for the illegal use of a firearm. Betty Broderick is incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. January 2010 was her first parole hearing. Parole was denied because Betty did not show remorse and did not acknowledge wrongdoing. Betty was denied parole in November 2011 and again in January 2017. Betty will not be eligible for parole again until January 2032. She will be 84 years old.